It's all good now.
Okay, great. Good afternoon to those of you gathered on site, and good morning to those of you who, like me, might be rising a lot earlier than usual. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to witness another annual conference of the IRMS, and it's my honor to introduce today's presenters and chair this session. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for the invitation. Our first presenter in this session is Dr. Brian Buckstead of Creighton University, a performing and recording violinist, violist, conductor, and educator with a broad range of performing experience. Dr. Buckstead will be presenting today on Prokofiev's Violin Sonata without accompaniment, Opus 115, and will be presenting an argument to us that the case occupies a more important position in defining Prokofiev's late style than is commonly assumed, as conveyed through various expressive features that are best appreciated in performance. The title of the presentation is Performing Prokofiev, Articulation, Rhythm, Color, and Style in the Sonata for Solo Violin, Opus 115. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Buckstead to the platform.
Thank you very much, Keenan. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see here. I'm trying to get this to share. All right. I need to.
Yeah.
Oops. Okay. Now let me see if this will work. Sorry for the delay. Share.
Okay.
Okay. Can
Good.
you see?
Yes.
Looks
You can
good.
see the presentation and you can see me?
Correct.
Okay. Very good. So that's all set up now. Now, my presentation is on Prokofiev's, I think, really overlooked piece for solo violin later in his career, his Sonata for solo violin, Opus 115. Again, I chose this work because it is overlooked today. It's not performed that often. Um, the when you think of solo violin works of the 20th century, where what dominates that field. Well, earlier on, it's the works of Paganini, Bach sonatas and partitas. In the 20th century, the Izai sonatas, the Bartok solo sonata, these very virtuosic pieces for solo violin. And even with Prokofiev, his two concertos for violin, his violin piano sonatas are the really well known and often performed pieces. But Opus 115 remains less studied and less performed. So I think it's really overlooked piece that really deserves more attention because it's this very distilled vision of his kind of late style. Oops. Okay. Now, this was composed in 1947. It was written in kind of a pedagogical means for a Soviet Arts Council, meant to be performed by kind of young violinists as a study piece, a concert piece, either to be performed as a solo work or, really interestingly, as a group performance in unison with a group of violinists, which is, I've never heard it performed like that, but I think that's kind of a fascinating way to think about it. Published 1952. Prokofiev dies in 1953. The premiere did not happen until 1959 when the American violinist Ruggero Ricci premiered it. And today, again, I think it's a bit of an overlooked work. Now, when we think of the late Prokofiev style, I think, and that's very much in the style of this work. Melody tends to have just a very has a lot of clarity to it. Very direct, very memorable lines. Very kind of simple lines. Free tonal harmony that Prokofiev tends to do. Diatonic centers that often have these little bit of a jagged edge to them. These abrupt turns, these abrupt shifts. Often in Prokofiev, we get this motor energy, these displaced accents, this kind of dance-derived music. Kind of witty, lyrical. There are expressive moments, but it's always done kind of with restraint. Never, fully romantic. Always kind of with this classical edge to it. Now, the sonatas in 3 movements. I'm going to be focusing on the first movement because of the time that we have here today. The first movement is a sonata form with very accented gestures, a lot of chromaticism. The grace note character kind of follows through the whole movement. And there's this nice contrasting cantabile section. The second movement is a theme and variations. The third movement has kind of this mazurka-like feel to it. But again, I'm going to focus on the first movement. And the first movement, just at a glance here, exposition, development, recapitulation. So you can see that this is very much a classical work. If you look at the primary theme, transition, secondary theme, and so on, this looks like it could be, a Mozart or a Haydn sonata, at least in its outline here. It's very, very classically oriented. So Prokofiev uses this very classical formal structure, but again, he throws in his unique Prokofiev sense of tonality and color. And I will go through these sections. These are the sections I will mostly be focusing on. I'll kind of talk about them a bit. I will play them so you get an idea of how that sounds and the decisions that a performer needs to make. But again, the grace notes are really a distinguishing ornament from this movement. The chromatic patterns, there are some tenuto marks, some accent marks, cantabile passages. So how to kind of distill the character of each one of these is really what this is going to focus on. Now, the opening, it opens with sort of this. This is a sonata in D major, but it opens sort of in A major with this arpeggio, almost this Mannheim rocket type of figure at the beginning here, with these quick grace notes, followed by these kind of fundamental A, E, A. So the main kind of theme goes. Okay, so we don't want to lose that foundational melody there with these grace notes. Okay, so again, you want these playful, very quick grace notes, but you want to be able to hit the main quarter notes with an accented bow. So you want to save room for the bow and pull through the notes. So those accented quarter notes come through the texture with some energy, with some life behind them. And the grace note should always be just slightly before the beat. So we want the main notes to be right on the beat itself. Now, a little bit later in the sonata, just a few measures later, we have Prokofiev marking this section al talone. So that means we are going to be playing this at the frog of the bow. So at the heaviest part of the bow where we put our hand, and that creates this really heavy kind of accented tone color when we get to that section. And a couple measures later, it says ORD, as in ordinario. So back to like a normal bowing style. So this is just kind of an interesting color change that Prokofiev throws in here. So a couple measures of kind of this heavy accented musical figure, and then back to when we get to the transition into the next theme, back to a more ordinary bow placement, which would be more in the middle of the bow. So let me demonstrate that. So again, altalone all the way at the frog. So kind of heavy, a little bit harsh sounding. Now, as we go into that transitional section that I just started there, here's where the chromatic line starts to come in. You can look at these accented notes that you see on the screen. And this is a motif that carries through the movement. We move from D to C sharp to C natural, D, C sharp, C natural. So there's this, Prokofiev is building this tension of the half step through this section. And it needs to kind of have direction to it, not just sound busy. So pulling out those accents through the speed of the bow is what we want to do without it sounding too heavy. And that sets up the contrasting second theme, which I'll get to next. Now, the second theme, as any classical or neoclassical composer would do, is contrasting. It's in the dominant key here, A major. So dolce, sweetly, it's marked piano, dolce. So it needs to be, lyrical. It needs to be warm, but still in this kind of, I think, expressive, but kind of a restrained espressivo. Okay, so that is that second theme. Now, what happens next is this kind of interruption through this chordal theme, this closing theme. And it's quite a dramatic interruption, like Prokofiev often likes to do. So here we want, and this is a little bit tricky to do on solo violin with these chords. We want them to not sound. The traditional way to play a chord on violin is to kind of roll it. Like that, but we have to maintain the tempo here. So it has to be done a little bit, of course, quicker, a little bit more percussively with quite a bit faster bow stroke. So we get that kind of typical Prokofiev motoric energy that he likes to infuse in his pieces. Okay, and that's the very end of the exposition. Now, as we get into the development section, where we, of course, tend to have instability, here we have, again, more kind of rapid shifting, abrupt harmonic changes. Intonation becomes kind of the central issue for anyone performing this. So let me play, again, you're going to hear that half-step motif. If you look at the accented notes, A, G sharp, G, and so on. Okay, and the very next section becomes quite chromatic. Again, with Prokofiev reintroducing that that grace note figure. And as we get toward the recapitulation, that half-step motive is again kind of showcased here. And if I move ahead one slide, you can see that the that chordal in the retransition here, that chordal interruption is introduced once again. And there, just like the opening, is the recapitulation. And now the recapitulation is, of course, just like the beginning up until we get to the second theme. But of course, the second theme is now not in the dominant, but in the tonic, like a typical, Mozart, Haydn, like they would do. And there's the start of the second theme, which again we're now in D major. Again, should be piano dolce, sweetly played, but not overly sentimental. And then we get the chordal interruption again. which sets up finally the coda, which is really this. Here's where this accented figure, these grace notes, come back. And here the performer really has to pay attention to going back and forth between accented and non-accented notes. So what I like to do is slightly separate the accented notes as opposed to the more connected non-accented notes. And that sets up the very end of the piece as we drive toward that final cadence. Okay, and the movement ends clearly in D major, as you can see there. So kind of looking overall at this movement, I think articulation is really critical to this. The grace notes, the accents, the tenutos, how the performer does that with the bow placement, that really becomes kind of the musical language, the syntax of this movement. And color is very important here. Again, which string are you playing on? Sometimes I was playing like in the upper register of a lower string to give it a certain color, or where in the bow was I, where was I in a certain passage? What type of vibrato is there? What type of bow speed? And the rhythm of this piece really kind of shapes the direction. We want this motor type of rhythm going, but there's certain spots where you just need to take a bit of time, especially in that lyrical section. Again, this is an interesting piece in that it's late in his career. It's quite a modest piece compared to what other composers were doing with solo violin works in the 20th century. It's not overly virtuosic, not that it's easy. It has this, like when you play Mozart, it's so difficult because there has to be a sense of perfection and cleanliness there. So it makes it kind of difficult in that respect, where intonation and timing and articulation really becomes the focus rather than, overt virtuosity. So I think it's a comparatively neglected work. I think it really illuminates these qualities that are central of Prokofiev's mature style. I think it's interesting in that it was originally written as a pedagogical work, but I don't think that reduces its artistic value at all. In fact, it's this kind of distilled vision of what Prokofiev was doing later in his career. And I think, it's not, again, driven by virtuosity, but by precision, clarity, these sharply drawn characters that we see in this movement. So I think, it is this concise, very performable distillation of Prokofiev's late style. So thank you very much. If you have questions, you can contact me here. And maybe we have a few minutes right now if you have any questions for me.
We certainly do, Dr. Buckstead, and thank you so much for this presentation and your really lovely demonstrations. What an enjoyable way to spend the past 20 minutes.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'd love to open with a question.
Yes.
I find myself thinking about Prokofiev's sonatas for my instrument, which is the piano.
Yeah.
And other genres as well, for the symphonies, for example. These, when you look at his output by genre, it does raise some kind of surprising questions about the periodization. For example, with the piano sonatas 6, 7, and 8 are known collectively as the war sonatas and are quite robust, and then number 9 tends to kind of cool off a little bit. I just wondered if you might be willing to speak to Prokofiev's other violin sonatas in that kind of respect. Do you see this sonata more as being akin to his sonatas 1 and 2? And I am referring to the violin setting of the flute sonata as the number 2.
Right. Yeah.
Or do you view it as striking out in a new direction? And if you care to go one step further, what do you think might have conditioned that direction in his style, or this moment in his style? Thank you.
Well, if I were to compare this to either of the sonatas, of course, it's closer to number 2. Number 1 is this dark, brooding, big work. What is the famous line Prokofiev said of there's this really quick chromatic running section at the end of, I forget which movement, but he said it's something like wind blowing through a graveyard or something like that. So that's I think, kind of a different part of his life, a different sound world. But yeah, it has a little bit of a likeness, like the flute sonata that was transcribed for violin. I don't know. I see this as, again, it was written originally for pedagogical purposes. And it's later than those two works. So I put it as kind of this separate entity in his. I mean, yeah, it shares a few surface similarities in kind of the style of the violin writing, but it's kind of distilled. It's simpler. It was written with students in mind. Again, either to be performed solo or in unison. If you're doing it in unison, it has to be simplified enough that it would work with a group of, let's say, 10 violinists. If it's overtly difficult or complicated, it just won't work in unison. So it has to have a clarity and a simplicity to it. So I think it kind of shares that clarity, the restraint, the lyricism associated with especially his late style. And I think it really distills those into this single instrument, which, again, it's kind of given the pedagogical background of this piece, Prokofiev kind of throws everything that he can within this kind of limited means.
Thank you. We might be able to squeeze in one more question. Does anyone, either on the Zoom meeting or on site, have any questions for Dr. Buckstead?
We have one here.
Hi, Brian. Good to see you.
Hello.
So nice to see you. Hi, Ken. So this was a very nice presentation. And just a few hours ago, we heard a beautiful presentation on the 1947 movie, The Spring, or Vesna, with music by Dunayevsky that seems on the surface very happy and jolly and shows all of these beautiful ideals of socialist realism, but then beneath the surface brings so many cries for help, really. And sometimes, the sonata is from similar years. Do you have experience teaching this sonata in the States as a teacher, or working or witnessing other people learn it? And if there is a way that they get more connected to this narrative by learning the sonata?
Yes, I have taught it a few times. In fact, I just taught it this prior semester. I mean, students, of course, these days are somewhat familiar with Prokofiev, either by performing, Peter and the Wolf, or maybe the classical symphony. So they kind of understand his style a bit. But generally, they've never done. At least I'm talking about university students or high school students here. They haven't done like the violin and piano sonatas. Those are a little bit more advanced. Some more advanced students could do those, but generally they haven't done any Prokofiev violin works. So I usually have students to kind of understand the style. I want them to read a little bit about the sonata, just to understand where Prokofiev was in his life at this time. His health was, kind of failing at this time. He was getting less attention from the government, from the public. So he was sort of toward the end of his career. So I want them to get a sense of where he is coming from. Now, it sounds kind of like this upbeat work when you listen to it. You know, it's in D major. The contrasting section is in A major. But I don't know, that half step motive here gives it a little bit of a darker edge to it. But I don't know, not that I hear anything overtly, demoralizing or anything like that in this work. I think it is kind of an upbeat work, but you have to kind of keep that in context of where Prokofiev was at his life during this time. It's kind of like if you think of Beethoven, he wrote his, Second Symphony, this very bright, uplifting symphony when he found out he was going deaf. And, he wrote the Heiligenstadt Testament during that time. How could he write a piece like the Second Symphony when he was, contemplating committing suicide, in 1801. So I think composers are able to overcome this sense of grief or, nearing the end of something and kind of come through and write something surprising.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you again for your presentation, Dr. Buckstead. Real pleasure to hear from you. Let's all offer him one final round of applause.
Thank you
so
very much. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to have you. Are we prepared to